Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us for this edition of the Becker Friedman Institute's Becker Brown Bag Lunch Series, this time featuring Professor Chang-Tai Hsieh. My name is Sam Ori. I'm the Executive Director of the Becker Friedman Institute. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to interact with us yet, BFI is a collaborative platform for the UChicago economics community. I was actually a little bit surprised to learn there are 250 economists across the UChicago economics community, and even more people, researchers, postdocs, and others engaged in research about a variety of issues across the economy. And so with that many researchers doing great work, having a platform that can really allow people to collaborate around specific issues and big topic areas allows us to really share and amplify that work in a way that can have real impact in the world. So we're excited to work with all those researchers and to put on events like this where they can share their work with all of you. So today, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Professor Chang-Tai Hsieh. Chang is the Phyllis and Irwin Winkelried Professor in Economics and a PCL faculty scholar at the Booth School of Business. He is the co-director of BFI's research initiative on development economics, and he has been a visiting scholar at the Federal Reserve Banks of San Francisco, New York, and Minneapolis, and the World Bank's Development Economics Group, and the Economic Planning Agency in Japan as well. He's published several papers in top economic journals, including the Quarterly Journal of Economics, the American Economic Review, and the Journal of Political Economy. So please join me in welcoming Chang for his remarks.
So the last reliable data on the World Bank doing business was 2013, and in terms of the overall ease of starting a business, China ranks 151 in the world. There were 180 countries surveyed, so it's at the very bottom in terms of how easy it is to start up a business. And just so that you have some reference, I thought it would be useful to just pick two countries that Donald Trump called his star countries, which is the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Haiti. And Congo actually ranks 152, so it's just slightly worse than China. So just so that we know what country we're talking about, this is the Congo of Mobutu, right? So that's the kind of country we're talking about. And Haiti actually does better than China, okay? Haiti, but there's something that all of you should see is something missing about this, because we don't talk about China in the same way that we talk about Congo. We don't talk about China in the same way that we don't talk about Haiti. So the talk is going to be, I'm going to try to get you to see what is it that's missing in data like this. Okay, but before I do that, I just want to give you just one more piece of quote unquote evidence. So here is the front page of a Chinese newspaper, and I'm going to call this the Chinese version of the Doing Business indicators. Don't know how many of you can read in Chinese, but I want to get you to focus your attention on the article that's on the very top. There's a guy that's also being that's being arrested as well. I'll come back to that at the very end of the talk. What the front page article is about, it's essentially a story about the small city in China and what it takes to get the permits for a small business to expand. Okay, so just so that we're clear on what we're talking about, it's about the small shoe manufacturer and what the small shoe manufacturer had to do to get the rights to expand their business. So just so that we're clear, we're not talking about getting Google permission to operate in China. We're not talking about getting the rights for a pharmaceutical company to operate. We're just talking about a small mom and pop business. And what the article says is that what this company has to do is that they have to pay 95 taxes. If you don't read Chinese, you can read the numbers, right? You have to pay 95 taxes, and they have to get 192 official chops of approval. So that's essentially the official signatures. And it took this business 2 years to do this. So basically, I think the way that you want to think about this is that there is something that the World Bank Doing Business indicators is capturing. Right, it's capturing, it's capturing these 95 taxes, the 192 official jobs, the 2 years that it takes. Okay, but then when you look at things, data like this, then you scratch your head and you say, why is China not like Haiti? right? Because this is Haiti. This is Haiti. And what I want you, I think the way to understand the puzzle is to look at what actually happens on the ground. Okay? So I thought the best way to illustrate the story is to tell you about a visit that me and my co-authors made to a very typical Chinese city. Okay? Here, I'll just skip this. So this is about 4 years ago. We went to a small city in southern China. Okay, it's a small city of 2 million people. So that's small by Chinese standards, but Boston has 1 million people, right? So it's a small city by Chinese standards. We went to the city because the person that I was doing work with, he had a former student that was a vice mayor of the education department. So this was the person that was in the municipal government that was responsible for running the public schools. Okay, so we got there at around, we got to the offices of this local government at around 10 o'clock in the morning, and the vice mayor said that he was going to meet him. He was not interested in me. He wanted to pay his respects to his former teacher. I mean, if you know Chinese culture, that this kind of respect is really important. And then we were met by his chief of staff, the chief of staff of the vice mayor of the education department. And he said, the vice mayor is really sorry. He really was looking forward to your visit, but something important is happening today. He has some important visitors, and he's going to try really hard to meet with you, but he may not be able to meet with you. So we said, fine, there's nothing that we could do about it. So we started to talk with the vice mayor, with the chief of staff of the vice mayor, and we started talking about what his office does. Within 5 minutes, he said, this is what our office does. Okay? So he proudly handed us this flowchart to describe what his office does. And here's my translation of this flowchart. This is the vice mayor for education. Okay? This is what we do. We actively look for quality prospects. We have an initial discussion to learn about the investor. We undertake a feasibility analysis. We identify land and other needed services, and then whatever it is he's talking about goes to approval by the vice mayor, and then we sign the agreement. Okay? What do you think he's talking about? What is the vice mayor and the chief of staff doing? Okay? This might be about schools. You might think that he's thinking about he's visiting people. But what he's talking about, it's basically about making private deals with companies that make shoes, companies that make toys, companies that make your phones. Okay? What you quickly figure out is that what the vice mayor for education is doing is that he's not spending any of his time running the public schools. Okay? What he's basically doing is that he's basically spending all his time soliciting business and making sure that the businesses that he solicits get everything that they need in order to make their businesses run. Okay, so let me tell you something more about this local government. Okay, so we spent 2 days there. The number one guy in the local government is the secretary of the Communist Party. Okay, that's the formal title is the party secretary. The number two guy is the mayor. Okay, so if you ever spend any time in China, don't ever make the mistake at going to the mayor first. You go to the party secretary first. So one way in which you could figure this out is that if you look at the license plate of the cars, the license plate of the party secretary is 1, of the mayor is 2. Is 2. I almost wanted to take a picture, but I was afraid I would get arrested if I did. But just look carefully at the license plate. You can figure out what the hierarchy is. And underneath the vice mayor, there are 9 vice mayors. So it's organized like the typical cabinet. One of these guys was the guy that we knew, the vice mayor of education, and then there's the vice mayor in charge of the population and planning department. That actually is the office with the largest staff, because their job is to implement the one child policy. And if you think about that work, how do you prevent people from having sex? But it's work, but they do it. They do it. But what you quickly figure out is that what that office does is the same thing. Okay? That the staff does it, but the top tier staff, what they're doing is the same thing the vice mayor of the education department is doing. The vice mayor for finance, vice mayor for the environment, and what you quickly figure out is that despite what their nominal titles are, what they're doing is that they're basically doing the same thing as the guy that you are doing. So what we did then is that we collected data on what were the companies that they were in charge of, what I'm going to call the favorite firms. Okay, and the rough number that we have is that each one of these vice mayor has roughly about 20 projects. So these are all private firms. So just so that we're clear on our terminology, the typical language, the discussion in China is about private versus state-owned firms, okay, and about the preference that state-owned firms can get. Okay, that is really not what the story is. The story is about all these guys, all these firms are private firms. Okay, they are not interested in the state-owned firms. They're doing all their work with the favored private firms. So the number that you want to think about, so we had access to the 9 vice mayors, we counted the numbers, and they're basically 100, the way you want to think about it is that there are about 180 firms. Am I doing my math right? 20 times 9, yeah. That's 180. There are 180 firms that are the favorite firms that are controlled by the vice mayor. We didn't have access to the mayor or the party secretary, but it was clear that the most important companies were directly handled by the secretary of the Communist Party and by the mayor. So maybe the number you want to think about is that in this city of 2 million people with a labor force of about 900,000, you have about 250 companies that basically get everything they want. Okay, and when we put together the numbers, these 250 companies have a total employment of about 300,000. So the way that you want to think about it is something like 30 to 40% of employment in the city is basically by firms in which that they get everything they get everything that they want. So let me just give you a summary of what I think the story is. And the way I want you to think about it is formal versus informal institutions. Okay? What the World Bank Doing Business Indicators measures, okay, is what I'm going to call the formal institution, what the rules on the book say. Okay? But what you quickly figure out in China is that if you try to go by the book, you're dead. Okay? You're in the Donald Trump land. Okay? You're in Haiti. You're in Haiti. Don't even try. Okay? Once they say you have to follow the rules, you might as well get out. Okay? That what you quickly figured out is that the way to operate is that there is a set of informal rules. Okay? You find a party boss somewhere. You find a party boss, and what the party boss will do is that they will basically make special rules for you. Okay? These 192 chops, you are my friend. You are my friend. You're my friend. Those rules don't apply to you. 92 taxes, they don't apply to you. Okay? There's this term, the Chinese don't have a term for this, but the Indians have this term that I love to describe this. So when you get out of the lecture, look up the word jugaad. Jugaad. So this is, when I talk with Indian businessmen, this is the term that they give me to describe what is it that they do. Okay? I think it summarizes what the Chinese do as well, but with a difference. And the difference is that I think of it as jugaad on steroids. That it's basically what I'm going to call easy access to these informal institutions. So let me give you 2 more examples to illustrate how this works out. Okay, so let me just give you a story of how this works out when you're on the other end. Once you're on the side of the party boss, what is it that you get? One of the phrases that you hear lots of local governments use is that they say that if you come to our city, we can operate with Zhengzhou speed. What do they mean by this? Okay, it comes from this experience. Okay, Zhengzhou essentially is about the iPhone. It's one of the places that the iPhone is produced. It's produced by this Taiwanese company called Foxconn that some of you may have heard of. And Foxconn has a plant in the city of Zhengzhou with 300,000 workers. So it's actually quite a sight to see the compound. It's a city. It's a city. So the story of Foxconn Zhengzhou is that Foxconn opened up its first plant in interior China in 2007 in the city of Wuhan. The governor of the province moved to the neighboring province in 2008. It's a guy called Mr. Guo. Okay? Now, we don't know what happened after 2008, but what you can find is that in 2010, in the summer of 2010, the CEO of Foxconn paid a visit to the city of Zhengzhou. So I found a picture, which I found a picture a couple of years ago. So here's a picture from Zhengzhou Airport at June 20th of 2010. Okay, one of these guys is the Communist Party bureaucrat. The other guy is the CEO of this Taiwanese company called Foxconn. And I challenge you to tell me which one is the Communist Party bureaucrat and which one is the CEO of the Taiwanese firm. Any guesses? It's no fair if you know these guys. It's not fair.
The guy that's not wearing a tie is probably from the Communist Party.
It's the opposite. I mean, I hate to venture into amateur psychology, and I can't say I've met that many, but I've met about 20 of these bosses. And the thing that really strikes me about their personality is that they remind me a lot of you guys. In the following sense, I mean, what I imagine you guys were going to be like when you're 50, which is about the age of that guy at the time. They're basically businessmen. They're basically about making deals. They're basically about making things happen. So in terms of the guy with the tie is the boss of the Communist Party. The guy without the tie is the CEO of the Taiwanese company that makes the stuff you have in your pocket. Okay? So what happened? Then you can find press reports in June 29th of 2010 that the city of Zhengzhou signed an agreement with Foxconn. Okay? And the official deal was that Foxconn was to build their facilities, and the city was responsible for building the dorms and the hospitals because there's hospital inside the compound. And then when you talk with the people who run the city, there were lots of other informal side deals as well. Because when I talked with the dean of the local business school, he tells the story in which he got orders through the Communist Party bureaucracy that his best MBA students have to go work at Foxconn, and he was given a quota. He was given a quota to me. But the way that you want to think about it is that after the agreement was signed, the entire Communist Party apparatus swung into action to make sure that this project is successful. Okay? So the agreement was signed in June 29th of 2010, and in August 20th of 2010, okay, 2 months, okay, Foxconn Zhengzhou opened up for business with an initial employment of 1,000 workers. It just took them 2 months to get this up and go, to get this up and going. So, all the other local governments, they basically use this and say, we can do the same thing. Okay, so so this is what you get when you are, on the side of the bosses. So I have a picture. Here's a picture of the outside of the Foxconn plant. So if you read Chinese, it says that this road can only be used by Foxconn. Let me give you so the way that you want to think about the story is that I want to summarize that there's a set of formal rules and there's a set of informal rules. Okay? I'm going to say that the formal rules are hugely dysfunctional Okay? But there's something about the way that this informal system operates that makes the system work. And I want to illustrate this by talking about one specific aspect of Chinese policy. Okay? So the main element of Chinese industrial policy in the 1990s and the 2000s was what they call their policy to support support the strategic industries. And their policy was the following. Okay? They picked about 20 sectors, which they call the strategic sectors, and they basically put in place a set of rules, laws, that said that in these sectors, okay, only these firms are allowed to operate. Okay? So in the aluminum industry, only one company was allowed to produce aluminum. In the steel industry, they only allowed 7 firms. In the car industry, they only allowed 6. Okay. Now, when you look at it as an economist, this looks like a total disaster, right? This looks like a total disaster. You know, if you only allow these 6 firms to operate, then there's basically no competition in there's no competition in the system. Okay. But I want to illustrate how it didn't quite work out that way. Okay. And the way I want to illustrate it is by talking about what happened to the car industry in China. And I first want to start by talking about this company called Shanghai GM. So Shanghai GM is the largest car company in China. Okay? It is probably the most successful in terms of profits, but I want to just be clear that we're talking about profits that doesn't necessarily transfer to the welfare in terms of the welfare of the country. And this company, as the name would suggest, is that it's a joint venture. Okay? 50% of the company is owned by General Motors, 50% is owned by this other company called the Shanghai Automobile Corporation. Okay? The Shanghai Automobile Industrial Corporation is one of the 6 favored firms that was allowed to produce cars. Nobody else outside the 6 were allowed to produce cars. So GM, you know, they went in and they partnered with SAIC because that was the only option. That was the only way in officially into the market. So SAIC is a very typical state-owned firm. Okay, it's a publicly listed company, so your pension funds probably owns part of this company, but the majority stake is held by this holding group called the SAIC Group, and the group itself is owned by the local government of the city of Shanghai. Okay, this is important. So it's a state-owned firm, but it's owned by the city, not by the central government. So just to give you a sense of what else this company does, this company also runs another joint venture called Shanghai Volkswagen. So it owns 50% of this venture with Volkswagen, as the name might suggest. So imagine that a bunch of you have been to Shanghai. Yes? Did you notice the taxis in Shanghai? Did you pay attention? Let me show you a picture of taxis in Shanghai. You notice something strange about them? There's only one type of taxis that you're going to find in the city of Shanghai. What is it? It's a VW, and it's not just a VW, it's a VW Passat, which is a 1970s model. Okay? That's the only one that you're going to see. Okay? Did you ever wonder why why taxis are only VWs? Well, because it's the car company that's made by the party boss. Okay? I imagine a bunch of you have been to Beijing. Did you notice the taxis in Beijing? There's only one type of taxi as well. Do you know what type of car?
Hyundai.
What?
Hyundai.
It's a Hyundai. That's the only cab that you're going to see in the city of Beijing. Why?
It's controlled by the government. It's owned by the government.
It's not just the government. It's the city of Beijing. The city of Beijing owns a car. I'll give you one more question. City of Guangzhou. Taxis. Toyotas. Toyotas. You can figure out which is the favorite firm by just looking at the cabs. Okay, it's easy. It's easy to figure out. So this is the consequence, right? Because basically these local governments are running businesses. Okay, they're running businesses, and there's nothing that says that you cannot drive a VW taxi in the city of Shanghai. There's nothing in the rules that say officially say that. It's just that there are 100 rules that you have to follow if you want to set up a car company, and things are going to go easier for you if you say that you're going to buy a fleet of VW VW Passats. Okay, if you don't, fine, it's okay, but follow these rules, and if you follow the rules, then you are dead. That's essentially the way that the system works. And then the third company that SAIC owns is that this was the original state-owned firm. It's just called SAIC. Okay, so this was the original state-owned firm, and what they basically try to do is that they try to make cars under their own brand. Okay, so think about what the guys at GM are doing. Okay, they come into China, and they say, we are going to do business with the communist boss of the city of Shanghai. Okay, and the reason we want to do business with the communist boss of the city of Shanghai because it's the biggest and the baddest party boss in China. And basically what the Communist Party boss of Shanghai promised them is that we are going to make sure that nobody else is allowed to sell mid-size sedans with an engine size over, I think the formal agreement was that it's over 2,000 milliliters in the city. So basically what they got was a monopoly right. Okay? So for them, it made sense. For the guys at GM, it makes sense. But for the consumers in Shanghai, it was terrible. It was terrible because you either buy GM or you buy GM. Okay? But then on the other side, right? It was also clear when you talk to them, is that the part of the agreement also was that in their joint venture, they needed to hire a certain number of Chinese engineers and managers that would be rotated in from this other company, which was what was the other company trying to do? So basically, think about your partner. Okay, your partner is running 3 companies: one with you, one with VW, and the third company, which they're trying to run the company by themselves. And what do you think they're trying to do? What do they want from GM?
Technology.
They want technology. I mean, the reason they were invited in was because they don't know, it's because they make star cars, right? They make star cars, and they thought that GM was the largest car company, so they must know how to make cars. A side note, little did they know, but that's something else. Okay. But now if you're GM and you know who your partner is, right? Think about what you're thinking about. You thinking to yourself, the monopoly power, that's great. Okay? I love the monopoly power, but if you just do a little bit of thinking, you also think, well, I know what my partner wants. My partner wants to learn how to make cars, and in the agreement, you know that in the agreement they insisted on having a certain number of engineers and managers in the critical positions of the company, because the idea, you would think that they want to learn how to make cars, and then eventually once they learn all of your secrets, then they can do it by themselves, so they don't need you, they don't need you anymore. And then later on, when you figure out that they've stolen all your intellectual property, okay, which court do you go to sue them? I mean, you are going to sue SAIC in the courts of the city of Shanghai. Good luck with that, because who appoints the judges? The same guy who owns a company that stole your business, right? Again, it's about the way you want to think about it. It's basically doing business with the mafia boss. That's the way you want to think about it. So, what did GM do? Okay, their response was to say, okay, I like the monopoly profits, okay? But I don't want them to steal my best intellectual property. So then, as one GM engineer told us, the way that we're going to square the circle is that what we're going to do is that we're only going to sell cars, okay, that if our partner were to steal our intellectual property, nobody else in their sane mind would ever buy this car. Okay? So the first car that GM sold in China was the Buick New Century, the proud joint venture. The plant opened up, started to make this car in 2001. Okay, GM said, we have a great product for you. Okay, we last made this car in the U.S. We last made the car in the U.S. in 1991. 1991 is the Buick New Century, and it's sold in Shanghai for $44,000. Okay, and it was the only car that you could buy. Okay, and GM could get it. GM could get it away with it because it basically had the protection of the mafia boss. Okay, nobody else could sell it. Toyota couldn't come in, Hyundai couldn't come in, Honda couldn't come in. Again, I want to be clear, it's not about any formal rules, right? There isn't anything that says that the Honda can't come in. It's just that the formal rules are long and onerous, and then when they throw the book at you, then you basically have to give up. Okay, so this is the first car that they try to sell. Here's the second car they try to sell in China. Okay, so they need a car that was slightly cheaper. Okay, and they basically took the design from the GM took the design from their German subsidiary Opel. They rebranded it as the Buick Sail. So I found a picture of the Opel car in Germany. Not sure whether that's West or East Germany. That looks East Germany to me. And then the car on the right is the Chinese version of the car. And that baby retailed for $33,000. Okay? So this looks, again, if you are a crony, this is the thing that you love, right? This is the thing you love. You love to be able to sell crap for high prices, right? With all, and this is what you see all over the world. So it's not just in China. It's sort of why we think we talk about crony capitalism. We normally think that this is something that is very negative. Okay, but the interesting part of the story comes in the third car that they started to sell in China. They needed a car that was slightly cheaper. Okay, and this time they went around and they took the design from the GM. Took the design from their Korean subsidiary, Daewoo, okay, and then they built a new plant. They arranged, they built a bunch of showrooms, and they were getting ready to introduce their third car, their smaller car in China. But then 3 months before they were ready to sell, okay, another Chinese company came onto the Chinese market, okay, selling exactly the same car. Okay, I have a picture. It's this company called Cherry. Okay, so somebody else, and I'll tell you about this other company in a minute, beat them to their market, have basically gotten a hold of their blueprint, okay, and beat them to the market. So the car on the orangish car, I can't count colors, that's the Chinese version of the car, that's the GM equivalent of the car sold in China, and the car to the right is the Chinese clone of the GM clone. Right, that's the Cherry car. So when we talked with the GM engineers, they were shocked when this happened. They went, so you couldn't buy Cherry in Shanghai, but you could buy it in another city. That's the interesting thing to think about. That where Cherry can sell, it's only in cities where only cities that doesn't have that doesn't have a local car manufacturer. A local car manufacturer. They opened up the car and they realized that they were working from exactly the same blueprint. So they had gotten a hold, this other company had gotten a hold of the blueprints and managed to beat GM to the market. Must say there's a little bit of innovation, right? The Cherry car has a smile and the GM car does not. So let me tell you about Cherry, because I think understanding Cherry makes you understand where the growth in China has come from. Because so far, if you think about GM, it's a very typical story. I can tell you the same story, in almost any country in the world. Cronies get access to power, and they use the power to extract monopoly rents. Okay? Cherry It's a company that was created in 1998. Founded by these two guys. Okay? It was created by these two guys. It was created in the city of Wuhu, very much like the city that I did describe to you. 2 million people. Now it's a major hub for the automobile industry, but back then there was nothing there. Okay, there was nothing there. There were these two guys, Mr. Yin, who was the current CEO of the company, and this Communist Party boss, the vice mayor, is a guy called Mr. Zhang. Okay, so the story is that Mr. Yin was a guy who got his yes.
If I am a resident of Shanghai and I decide I don't like Volkswagens, are there going to be any onerous government rules that make it hard for me to go over to Beijing, buy a car in Beijing, and drive it back to Shanghai for use in Shanghai?
Yeah, you can't register your car. You can't register your car. You're not going to find service because they're not allowed to set up. So again, there are no formal rules, but then basically, if you do anything that's outside of the informal system, then they throw the formal system at you. So this guy, Mr. Yin. So let me just give you a little bit of a sense of his career. He has spent, about 20 years working at this company, the state-owned company called the First Outdoor. So this is again one of the other six companies that was allowed to, and then that was officially allowed to make cars. First Auto Works had a joint venture. They created a joint venture with Volkswagen. Okay, so they created a company called FAW Volkswagen in the city of Changchun in northern China. And what Mr. Yin was in charge of was to set up the first plant of this joint venture. So the way he did it was that Volkswagen was cheap, okay? And they said, our contribution to this company is the following. We have this plant, this Volkswagen plant, outside of Pittsburgh that's not making any money. You can go there and basically grab that plant and ship it back to, you can ship that plant back to China, and that's going to be our equity contribution to the joint venture. So Mr. Yin was placed in charge of this project. So he led a team of 20 engineers. He went to this plant. It's called VW Westmoreland. It's basically a suburb outside of Pittsburgh. And he spent 2 years basically understanding how the plant was laid out, created the whole plant, and moved it to northern China. I know it's something straight out of a Donald Trump commercial, but it's true. I mean, this actually did. This actually did happen. And then he, took the creative part, reassembled the plant, and they started to make VW cars. Okay, but if you think about this guy, the guy was an employee of a state-owned firm, and the world was changing in China. Okay. And when we talked to him, he said, I don't want to be an employee of a state-owned firm for the rest of my life. I know how to do something. I know how to create a car company. I know how to set up a plant. I know where the suppliers are. I know how to do this. Okay? And I know how to do this. And so I want to do this by myself. I want to create something. I want to create a car company. I just need $1 billion. I need a way to deal with the fact that what I want to do is not legal. But for him, he said, it was a piece of cake. Because what he did is that he understood the system. And the system was that he knew that all these local governments wanted his business. So he went around and shot this project to a bunch of local governments, and he found this guy, Mr. Zhang, that really wanted to do this, okay? And the way that Mr. Yin described the deal with us, what the Wuhu vice mayor told him was that you let me take care of the politics, and I'll talk in a minute about what the politics are, okay? You just focus on getting some cars built here, which I actually find a remarkable statement, right? Because you can almost imagine, if you squint your eyes, you can imagine the conversation taking place in Palo Alto, that you have these two guys, one guy knows how to manage a company, one other guy knows the tech, Neither guy can do it by themselves. They get together, they specialize, they make a deal, they split the rents. Okay, and that's exactly what this this. So together, so Mr. Yin quit his job in the state firm, and they started this company. And the problem they had, okay, so the main problem that they had, was the politics, and the politics was basically these rules, these laws that said that what they wanted to do was not legal. Okay, only 6 companies were allowed to make cars, and this was what they wanted to do was in violation of the law. Okay, so we talked with the Wuhu vice mayor, and he said, I went and I begged this body in the central government called the NDRC whether to give us the right to make cars, and the answer came back. We went there twice. They said no. The third time they said, don't even ask me again. So what he said, okay, we know that asking them is not going to work. But then he said, well, let me try another way. And he said, look, according to the rules, only 6 companies are allowed to make cars, but there's nothing on the books that says anything about car engines. Okay, so he used that and he got a permit to set up a company that makes car engines, but engines only. Okay, so with that license, he went around and he bought an old Ford engine plant in the UK. So he took that plant and started to make an old Ford engine plant. They went back to the central government and said, we have this great company. We're making some great engines. We just need some cars to put the engines in. We just need a car to put the engine into. I know we're not allowed to make cars. We know we're allowed to make cars. But what about this special deal? Suppose that you give us a limited license where we promise to only sell our car in the city of Wuhu. And the guy, the NDRC said, the city of Wuhu only? You're willing to put that in writing? So with that restriction, they got their limited license. Okay, and once you understand the politics behind it, you can understand why that rule why that rule might work politically, because it doesn't threaten the profits of GM, it doesn't threaten the profits of Beijing, it doesn't threaten the profits of Guangzhou. So with that limited license, then they basically went around and they found another old plant. This time they found an old VW plant outside of Barcelona. So if you know the city, it's basically in that industrial district right north of the airport. And this is something the guy knew well. Oh my God, another older VW plant, piece of cake. So he basically disassembled the plant, took it back to China, and he started to make clones of the VW Jetta. So here's a picture of their car. The first car, the white car, is the Chinese clone. The car on the right is the VW Jetta. So this is the first car that this company made. Okay, they call it the Cherry Fengyan, or the Chinese, the wind and the rain. But they had a problem, which is their limited license. Okay, it's a city of 2 million. So they did their typical thing, which is that they forced all the taxi drivers to buy this car. That's 1,000 cabs. It was a poor city. It's a poor city. So if you are running a car company and you only sell 5,000 cars a year, I guarantee you're going to go bankrupt. Okay? So they were running out of money, desperate. They were running out of money. They were close to bankruptcy because they couldn't sell. They were not allowed to sell. So here's the interesting part of the story. In desperation, he went to the central government. This time he went to a political patron that was high up in the central government. And this political patron suggested the following deal. He said, why don't we go to SAIC, remember that company? And we offer them the following deal, that we will give them 20% equity of our company in exchange for the grand prize of 0. So they went to SAIC and they said, why don't you take a 20% equity stake in this great new company, and you can have it all for free. Okay? You can have it all for free. So that deal worked. So the SAIC took a 20% equity stake in the company. So with that with that transformation of ownership, quote, they went back, so they basically registered the firm again. They went back to the NDRC and said, look, You know these 6 companies that are allowed to make cars? Look at our new registration. We are SAIC. SAIC and us, we're just one. We're just one and the same. So with that, they got the full license to make a car. So the second car that they made was the clone of the car that was made by the partner of SI. So the guys at GM, they were shocked first by the fact that somebody had stolen their property, and it took them a year to realize that this company was 20% owned by their partner. This is actually a growing trend, and I'll come back to this point. Like what you see more and more of is basically the use of what I'm going to call strategic investors. But it's not in the typical sense that you guys might know about it. It's about strategic investors that basically give you access to the political system. Okay, that's what you're starting to see a lot of. So let me just show you. So here's the party boss. Here, I think that's the Spanish ambassador that Mr. Zhang is meeting. That's Mr. Yin. This is so. Chery has now grown. So it's no longer cloning cars. It's now making stuff. It's now making stuff of its own, and that's him announcing a joint venture with Jaguar. I guess Jaguar, as you can see. So let me just show you one. So here's the Chery. It's actually legally registered as a state-owned firm. Okay, so the local government, the city of Wuhu, owns 50% of the company. Mr. Yin owns another 10% of the company, and the other 40% of the company is owned by holding companies that nobody knows who they are. And that's going to be a pattern that you see in all the successful Chinese private firms. That it's really hard to figure out who they belong to. And once you understand the system, it should be clear, right? It should be clear why there's this obfuscation about who is actually the owner of the company. Chery, think about the company, okay? It cannot sell in Shanghai. It cannot sell in Beijing. It cannot sell in Guangzhou, okay? What does it do? It sells in minor Chinese markets, and what it does is that it exports, okay? And that's, I think, a big part of what Chinese exports are about. That it's about, the formal term that we use as economists is that it's trade diversion. That it's the fact that trade barriers internally are much higher than trade barriers externally. So Chery, 80% of what it sells are sold in the rest of the world. Okay, now Shanghai, as you imagine, it's the largest car company in China. It exports nothing. Zero. Why? I mean, there's no reason for it because it had access to the largest and the wealthiest market in China. So just to give you an illustration, a couple of years ago, I was in a small town outside of Bogota in Colombia, and guess what I saw? Chery. So I had to take a picture. So this is a Chery. This is a Chery van. So what you start to see more of in Colombia, I guess I won't say I've gathered the data, but just empirically with my eyes, what you see is a tradition that the local cars have been made by this French company called Renault. Don't ask me why. It's like the only place outside of France where you probably see the Renault cars. But you see this growing market share of the Korean car companies, and I start to see more cherries on the street. Yeah.
Actually, all of the cabs in Colombia are either Chery or Chevrolet Spark. So.
All right. So let me just summarize the story by like 2 quotes from people who run businesses in China. Okay, and then I'll just spend a minute summarizing the system. So here are 2 quotes. This is from a Taiwanese businessman. The first one says the way that he understands the system. Each locality operates like a standalone company. The way that it's basically, each local government is basically a company. Okay? Localities prompt investments, strong arm banks for finance, and often hold shares in the business of themselves. In the case of Chery, it's clear. Right? They operate much like a company might. At the same time, a local party's overwhelming powers within its borders effectively make each district its own separate jurisdiction with direct control over the courts and over local regulations governing business activities. Here's another quote. Shanghai and GM specifically. The commercial role of selling more GM Buicks and Chevrolets in China become a political and economic campaign to enhance the power and the might of the city of Shanghai. Think of it as Shanghai Inc. with the Communist Party secretary, the chairman, and the CEO. That's incomplete because it's not just Shanghai Inc., right? It's Wuhu Inc., Beijing Inc. There are 3,000 cities. So that's a way to think about where the competition in the Chinese system is coming from. So let me just summarize but what I think are the central parts of the system and just some questions going forward. So the way that you want to think about it, the way I think about the system is that it's a system of crony capitalism. Okay, that's the first thing that you've got to understand. But what I'm going to call with Chinese characteristics that makes it different. Okay, what are the Chinese characteristics? You can think of three. One is that you basically have a Leninist party state using its powers to support selected private firms. So the way to think about it is that the same power, the same bureaucratic apparatus that enforces the one-child policy, the same party apparatus that in 1958 had the ability to starve 40 million people to death, okay, in the past 25 years has used that same power, okay, to make private businesses work. Not all, that's what crony capitalism is all about, but a subset of them, and enough of them. So the question is, well, the cost of this are the cost of monopolies and the cost of resource allocation, and the question is, what are the costs of that relative to the productivity gains and the support of private firms get? That's the first question. The second part, you saw this in the car example, is that there are a large number of competing local governments. So you don't need access to one. If you don't have access to one, you can get many. And the extent to which you can earn monopoly rents is limited by the fact that there's so many of these guys. Okay. And the third thing is, why does the Communist Party choose to do this? Okay. Why do they choose to do this instead of doing what normal powerful party states do, or what the Chinese state what they did in, what was done in numerous episodes. And I'm going to lay out two hypotheses. I'm going to say that the official version, the official narrative, if you were to ask the senior Communist Party official, what they're going to say is that they do this for the glory of the party. Okay, so I'm going to call this the culture and the reward structure of this body called the Organization Department of the Communist Party. So you may want to think about this answer the same way you think about, why is it that Catholic priests do what they do? We don't think it's because of the money. We think that's because there's a sense of mission that they get from doing what they do. And the alternative story is that no, the way that you want to think about the system is what I'm going to call, just to be extreme about it, is that it's about the greedy bastard model. And the greedy bastard model is that there has been what I'm going to call a remarkable tolerance of private rents. And that's what accounts for the murkiness of this ownership structure. What you see is that all these guys live pretty darn well. Okay, that those are it's the other part of an absolute part of a party state with power. And then you want to think about, well, what if what are the risks in the system? That if it's about the last one, I mean, if that is what is driving these guys to behave the way they do, what happens when you crack down on corruption? Okay, which arguably has happened in the last 4 years. In the last 4 years. And then if you believe the story, what you're going to have is that if you think about the system, that it relies on their discretion, and the reason they use their discretion is because they get rents. Once you take away the rents, well, what are these guys going to do? Well, I'm going to play golf I'm going to play golf all day. Okay? And empirically, what you see is that growth has slowed by quite a bit. Now, what has masked that is that the rest of the world has done a lot worse. But that's something else. The rest of the world has done worse. But growth used to be 10% per year, and now it's down to 4. Now it's down to 4 and to 4 and 5%. So I think I have 1 minute for questions. Yeah, let me get her.
Do you think that the crony capitalism model in China might be a necessity rather than a product of political greed? Because then the state will be able to select for the companies that they know will be loyal to the interest of the state. And given, I guess, the really messy legal system in China, it's like a barrier against these companies essentially cheating their way into profits without selling any products at all.
Let me say two things. That I don't think this was any explicit design. I mean, I'm pretty sure it was not part of any explicit design. The way I've heard it explained. So if you think about what makes this model politically sustainable, that basically this is a system that gives profits to private businesses, and it also increases the power and the wealth of the Communist Party. That is, you need them. Okay? So the phrase that I've heard is that what's the goal is to have a marriage of the Communist Party and Goldman Sachs. That's sort of their model, and they sort of have it. That's sort of the model. So it's politically sustainable because it enhances their power. Part of what you're seeing, but not completely, right? Because part of what you are seeing is that once you start to see, I guess, let me say the following, okay? What you start to see about 5 or so years ago is that you start to see lots of these local Communist Party bosses, they start to behave much more in the interest of what their companies want relative to what the orders are that are coming down from the hierarchy of the Communist Party. So you can think about the party wants you to do something, okay? And you think, this is not in the interest of my company. This hurts my $30 million in cash. My children are in, my child, not my children, maybe children, but that's not official. My child is in Vancouver. My child is in Vancouver. So what do I care more about? So what you start to see is that more and more of them are starting to act in the interest of the private companies rather than in the interest of the party. And one hypothesis is that that's part of what led to the crackdown on corruption, because it was viewed as a threat to the political power of the party. And that's partly what is behind the crackdown that you've seen in the last year on these very large firms, is to try to make sure that they understand who the boss is. Okay, so yeah, it's about money. It's about the combination of money and profits. So if you have like a dictatorial government that can pull that off, I think that's the dream of any dictator in the world. If you have power and money, but you know, there's a tension there, right? There was some. Let me get you.
Yeah, so I think there are good public schools in China. In particular, I think there are good public schools. So I have two questions first.
Yeah.
Who runs the schools? And second,
Yeah.
what's the incentive of actually having good schools then?
The party boss is not taking care of running the school. It's a really interesting question. What you see in the public schools is that the way that you want to understand the system is that all throughout the system, the system is run like a tournament. You see this all throughout the bureaucracy. You see this in the state-owned firms. That basically, like a state-owned firm is placed in a tournament with another state-owned firm. You see this in the universities. That basically the universities know what buckets they're in, and they are judged according to how they do relative to the bucket. The same thing holds for schools. That when you talk with the teachers, they know who their competitor is. Their competitor in terms of how they are ranked. And it's basically another teacher in the same school. That if you get more students that pass the college entrance the entrance examination, you get a bonus, or you get certain preferences. So that's part of what I think makes the parties, that the Chinese party structure works, is that I used to say that I used to say before I knew anything about GE, it's run like GE. Now I know the facts about GE. I won't say that. I won't say that anymore. So if there's an equivalent of GE, but it's essentially a competitive internal organization.
I think we're right at time. Maybe we can take one more question. If there's one short question.
Yeah.
Do you have a rough estimation of how many % of the Chinese economy comprises of this kind of
These firms?
joint businesses?
Let me give you one metric. Okay. There's this fabulous owner. I don't know how many you saw 5 years ago, the series of articles that the New York Times wrote about this insurance company that they claim was owned by the premier of China. Did you remember this the story? I mean, that's what led to why the New York Times was blocked in China. So it was blocked as a it's not what's the name of the company? I'm sorry? Ping An Insurance. If you remember the details of the way the New York Times figured it out was that there's this ownership data in China, and basically every firm has to register. Okay, and what they did is that what the reporter in the Times did is that he basically collected all the registration data, and what he told was a story that everybody in China knows, that these private companies are basically organized like these Russian dolls. Like 30% of the company is owned by this other company that you know nothing about. Then you go look at this other company, and it's owned by 3 other companies you know nothing about. But the guy at the Times basically went back through the chain, and he figured out that once you go up, 10 layers up the chain, one of the owners was Wen Jiabao's grandmother. The other one was the mother of his driver, and the other one was. But you can get access to that data. Okay? So the reason I say it just so you know where the data is. So you can look at what are the companies that are linked, that are linked by some ownership pattern, and the answer is that, so in terms of objective data, about 4% of Chinese companies have effectively the same owners in some sense, and these companies account for about 50% of all the equity in the company. And this is a pattern that has grown. That has grown over time. I mean, I would love to be able to do this. We went back to this local government, and now they're terrified. They don't want to talk. But 4 or 5 years ago, when we went there, it was such an open system that they were saying, "Sure, of course, this is what we do." They also thought that the University of Chicago was a business. I said, no. No, I have no business for you. I just want to understand. But at that time, it was a very open system. Now things are changing quickly. Right?